For our scripture lesson today, we continue in the book of Genesis. Our scriptures today are in Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 through 21. Please stand as I read the scriptures this morning. The boy grew and stopped nursing. On the day he stopped nursing, Abraham prepared a huge banquet. Sarah saw Hagar's son laughing, the one Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham. So she said to Abraham, "Send this servant away with her son. This servant's son won't share the inheritance with my son Isaac." This upset Abraham terribly, because the boy was his son. God said to Abraham, "Don't be upset about the boy and your servant. Do everything Sarah tells you to do, because your descendants will be traced through Isaac. But I will make of your servant's son a great nation too, because he is also your descendant." Abraham got up early in the morning, took some bread and a flask of water, and gave it to Hagar. He put the boy in her shoulder sling and sent them away. She left and wandered through the desert near Beersheba. Finally, the water in the flask ran out, and she put the boy down under one of the desert shrubs. She walked away from him about as far as a bow shot and sat down, telling herself, "I can't bear to see the boy die." She sat at a distance, cried out in grief, and wept. God heard the boy's cries, and God's messenger called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "Hagar, what's wrong? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy's cries over there. Get up, pick up the boy, and take him by the hand, because I will make of him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well. She went over, filled the water flask, and gave the boy a drink. God remained with the boy. He grew up, lived in the desert, and became an expert archer. He lived in the Paran desert, and his mother found him an Egyptian wife. These are God's words for God's people. Thanks be to God.
If one or two of you would take out a Pew Bible, probably the large printer red, turn to Genesis 21. If some of you bring your own Bible, if you would turn, I'm going to just ask a couple of questions as we go through the sermon. Those online, if you have a Bible, I invite you to do that and follow along, because there's going to be a couple of questions I want to ask you as we go through. Okay, if you have a phone, go ahead and bring it up on your phone. Okay. On there. So, I just want to start at the beginning. Thank you, Jay, for the wonderful scripture reading. But I want to start at the beginning. You know, this is a sermon series called Genesis, the book, not the band. And Genesis means beginning. So I want to start at the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story sets up finally the actual birth of Isaac. They have waited 25 years for this child, for God's promise to come to fruition. And it says that after the boy is weaned, what do? What's it say? In the CEV, it said a huge banquet. Anything else? What's it say? Great feast. Thank you. You just yell them out. It's really okay. Yeah, great feast. There is a huge party happening. A wonderful celebration. And from what I can tell, and looking back, this is the first real party that we have in the Bible. And I don't know if you've ever thought about all the parties that happen in the Bible. There's a lot of parties that happen in the Bible. When they return from exile, in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, there's going to be this long day of celebration. It's just going to go on all day. When we went through the book of Esther, it seems every time, the only thing the kings seemed to do was party. I mean, it was just every chapter, he's having a party, he's having a party, queen's having a party, they're having a party. And Jesus went to parties. In the Gospel of John, his first miracle is what? Turning water into wine, so the party can continue. Jesus talked about, he used parties in his parables. Even one about the great wedding feast. Now, when I come from a pretty large family, I have 5 siblings, but my dad had numerous aunts and uncles, cousins, second cousins, the Miller side of the family, this large family. We'd celebrate anything and everything. Graduations, first communions, confirmations, birthdays, significant birthdays, retirements, somebody getting a new house, a baby being born. There is a reason we got together to celebrate. And then there was the wedding. Now, I grew up Polish, German, Roman Catholic. Some of you have been to those weddings, I can tell, right? This is not, it's a big deal. There's the wonderful Mass and the celebration, then you have to drive and you're going to, what we call the hall. Sometimes it was at the Elks Lodge or somewhere with this big room, all the tables, lots of food. Lots of food. And then more food. Lots of beverages. Maybe we didn't call it Miller time for lots of dancing. That's why I love Polka Sunday. There was lots. Now, after I graduated high school from Michigan, and that was the weddings I was used to, I went to a private Christian school where no drinking, no dancing, no going to the movies, no smoking. And the secretary in the religion department was getting married, a religion major. She just puts up this general announcement inviting all the faculty, and each student wants to come to the wedding. This sounds great. Some friends and I would get a card, put some money in. I'm going to go, decided to ask one of the female religion majors. I'm thinking this is going to be fun, right? We're going to be able to provide my date a nice dinner, right? We're going to have a good time. We go to this church. We sit through this very short service of about 18 minutes. We go into we didn't have to drive anywhere. We just went to what they call the fellowship hall. First time I'd been in one of those. They had cake and punch. Now, fiscally, financially, that's a really good thing for the couple, right? That's a good thing. But now I'm needing to buy dinner. So we just do the Alberto Street Rome chocolates with guacamole for $1.99. Go sit in our West clothes on the ocean, on the beach. 7:10 now. But here we have this party. I don't think this party that Abram throws is a tea and cookie reception. Okay, I think they're having a really good time. They are having a good time until then there's an awkward moment. I don't know if you've ever been to a celebration or something that all of a sudden it just goes wrong. And what is the awkward moment? The awkward moment happens when Sarah sees Ishmael, Hagar's son, and she says, "Get this servant and her son out of my house." Yells it to her husband, probably in front of everybody. Stunned, silence. The party is over. And here's this awkward moment. Now, I just want to kind of back up and put into context what has gone before. What has gone before, and the story really starts in Genesis 12. Genesis, the book, not the man. Genesis 12, where God first speaks to Abram and says, "You're gonna have many, many children. You're gonna be a father of a great nation, you and Sarah." And it's not happening. It doesn't happen. And he asks God, and years are going by, and God says, "Yeah, just look up at the stars. It's going to happen." And things still aren't happening. Sarah's not able to conceive, and things aren't happening. So they kind of get this idea. I think it was Sarah's idea. You can look at Genesis 16 that they have a servant named Hagar. What was her name? Hagar. And what's her name? Hagar. And Sarah says, "Well, have a child with her." Do you know what that involves? Yeah, without her consent. And she's abused, mistreated, taken advantage of. But she's a slave. And she bears a son. They call him Ishmael. It's a difficult story, and actually, in the midst of this, she runs away. She runs away. It's in Genesis 16. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, Go back to last May 1st of 2022. It's in a sermon called When the Neighborhood is Difficult in the Mr. Rogers Sermon Series. More about that. But when she runs away, she encounters God. And she calls God a special name, the God who sees. She comes back, she's there, her child. Now finally Abraham and Sarah have their child. 25 years after the first promise, they have their child. They're having this party. Ishmael is laughing. He's laughing. And it sets Sarah off. Now, maybe Ishmael was just having a good time like a boy, or maybe mocking. Not sure, but Isaac is the one who's named Laughter, not Ishmael. And it sets Sarah off, and she says, get this servant. Now, in other translations, she's not called a servant. What is she called? Slave woman. Get this slave woman out of my house. What was her name? Hagar. Get this slave woman out of my house. She's one of those people. Huh? One of those. Not even going to call her by name. Now we can objectify, remain distant, have no connection. Now that happens, doesn't it? Now I don't want to demonize Sarah, because sometimes we're Sarah. Sometimes we do that to be disconnected from people. Make them those people. Don't call them by name. You know, in the courtroom, prosecution does a really good job of never calling the defendant by name, just says the defendant. Try to get a disconnect between that person and the jury. Don't want that connection. Those people. Just those people. Some of you have heard about this person before. Her name was Kathleen. And when I first met her, it was because I was visiting a special ministry. Drove up from San Diego to Reseda, California, to what's called the Mary Magdalene Project. And it was a special home in a residential neighborhood to help women, help female, help girls to get out of one type of life into a much better life, providing them education, medical care, dental care, helping them get their life a better life. And that just, is of what they were doing. And her name was Kathleen, and I remember being there, and she had already got her GED, and she was taking a couple of community college classes. And she was doing a creative writing class. And I said, wow, man, I really admire you for doing that. She goes, well, it was going well up until a point. She, one of the assignments that had to write kind of an anecdotal, autobiographical short story for creative writing. And so she told about her past and what she did. And she had been a prostitute. And then she said, after that, her classmates then stopped calling her Kathleen and said, oh, there's that prostitute. Sometimes we're like Sarah and we go, those people. Now, who are those people for you? Who are those people? Who are those people? But there's Sarah. She looks and she fixates on Ishmael and his laughing. After all these years of wading through the waters of doubt and frustration and disappointment, she has her son, but she's not focused on the consummation of the promise of God and her own son Isaac. She's looking at Ishmael laughing, and all of a sudden, all this stuff, her prejudice is overriding the promise of God, and her frustration is overriding the future that God has for them, and it just kind of wells up and then just boom, burst out. Get this slave woman out of here. Doesn't even call her by name. Objectify. Now, we can take a step back. If we want in this story, we can go up to the 3,000-foot level, way beyond the balcony view, look at the story and go, objectively, it's really just about these two people. And it's explaining this historic animosity between these two groups of people, Ishmael the Arabic line, and Isaac the Jewish Hebrew line, and it's just explaining it. But then we remain objective. I want us to step into it. Step into the story. Because there we are, at the party. And all of a sudden there's this awkward moment. But who are those people for you? In the early church, you would have been those people? Because you weren't Jewish? Well, maybe some of you are. I don't mean offense. But being Gentiles, in the early church, they argued about it. Should Gentiles even come in? Peter got in trouble for going to the home of a Gentile and sitting down and eating? And that were those people. You know who else were those people in the early church? The military. Do you know they weren't really welcomed? The Roman soldiers weren't welcomed into the church at first. Why? Well, they had been oppressing them. They were mistreating them. Power over them. And they had, in the early church, they had to come to a time. They were those people. Who are those people for you? Who are those people for God? The next scene. Let's step into the next scene. There's Abraham. He's just been told he has to say goodbye to his son and to the mother of his son. What was her name? Hagar. Can you imagine? So he gets a flask, put some water in it, grabs some bread. Now these are minimal provisions. Perhaps he's hopeful. Perhaps he is hopeful that someone else, when she leaves, will take Hagar in. Hoping. So just going to need a day because he's going to be able to take her in. Perhaps he's hopeful. Perhaps, he's just trying to ease his own pain and conscience. Or perhaps it's all he could sneak out of line of sight from his wife to give to him. But then he comes to the part that he says he had to put his son in a sling that she wore on her shoulder. Last time he'd ever touch him. Last time he'd ever seen him. Last time to kiss him. Last time to say anything to him. When we start doing those people, there are pain and consequences for others that we don't even see. I probably expected more from Abraham. Maybe stand up, not do it. But I'm also a realist. Men, maybe you can help me out, but when my wife tells me to do something, you know what I do? Yeah. But I don't want to let Abraham off the hook too much. I don't want to demonize Sarah. I don't want to let Abraham off the hook. Because sometimes we expect more. Because I'm going to ask, is this how God's people are to treat God's people? Because sometimes God's people don't act like God's people. And Abraham has to say goodbye. Abraham has to say goodbye to, what was her name? Hagar. So let's step into the next scene. It says that Hagar, she left and wandered. She left and wandered. Now let's unpack that for a minute. And she's probably thinking, after all this, after all I've done, after my loyal service, and after I've born a son, this is how I'm treated. She leaves, she wanders. Now, maybe, is there hope that someone else is going to take her in? No. She's wandering in the desert. It goes back to a story earlier in Genesis with the story of Cain and Abel. It's in Genesis 4 if you want to read it. But Cain kills his brother Abel, probably out of jealousy. And God's punishment is to Cain, you're going to be a wanderer. Or Cain says, that's too great, that's a death sentence. because it was a very tribal and territorial area. You go into someone else's territory, you're probably going to be killed. This is what's happening for Hagar. She's a wanderer. It's not a thing where people are just going, oh, come on, I'll take you, I'll welcome you in. And the food isn't lasting. It's one flask and a little bit of bread. And after all that, see what happens when we do those people? Now, maybe some of you know what it's like to be those people. Maybe you've been those people, other people thinking of you as those people. Sometimes we as a church are thought of as those people. Did you know that? Sometimes. There's a demographic that we use sometimes. It's called Mission Insight. And just a few years ago, prior to the pandemic, prior to COVID, and election, January 6th, and a lot of other stuff, one of the questions that was asked by people is, do you think the church people act like Jesus did? And just a few years ago, 37% disagreed. Now the national average is in the 60%. Over 65% now. They've almost doubled. Say, church people don't act like Jesus. See, to some people, we are those people. But she wondered. Her life is going to depend on the grace of anybody else. But who cares about her, right? Did anybody at the party? Are they caring? Anybody out there caring? Abraham caring? Sarah caring? Anyone? And all she has is the blazing hot sun and a dying child. She sets her son down, and she goes away. She came to her to see her son die. Now let's step into the next. God heard the boy's cries. Now, Ishmael means God hears. That is not just a play on words. That is for emphasis. Here is the one that God hears, hearing that boy cry. See, for God, there are no those people. Right? There are no those people. And since God has heard the boy's cry over there, and now the voice comes to her, messenger from God saying, don't be afraid, it's going to be okay. God is with you too. God is with that boy too. God has heard. And God opens up her eyes and she sees this well so they can get some water and have life. And now that is not just a play on words either. Remember back in Genesis 16, when she first encountered God, she says, you are the God who sees. And now God enables her to see, to have life, to experience this life beyond others' jealousies, beyond the jealousy of others, beyond the frustration of others, beyond the hatred of others, behind the protectionism of others. God is providing, what was her name? And her son Ishmael life. Just as God was providing it for Abraham and Sarah and Isaac. Hagar comes to know God as the God who sees, as the God who hears, and now she sees a way for life. And sometimes people, is it true that God can be with those people? I mean, is God really with those people? Yeah. God is with those people. God is with these people. And us people. The early church, they struggled with those people. Gentiles, military, Roman soldiers. And it was really focused in the church in Philippi because Roman soldiers who retired, they were given a plot of land in the area of Philippi, and they were becoming Christian and coming into the church. And Paul, if you read Paul's letter to the church at Philippi, you'll see some of that. But notice what he's saying to a church that's going, right, those are those people. No, look at what Paul says. Look at what Paul says, especially in chapter 2, chapter 4. You know, who were those people for Jesus? Jesus ate, it was said he ate with sinners. Well, that's a good thing. That would be every one of us, right? He ate with tax collectors. Is that any of you? And do you know he also ate with the Pharisees? He had dinner with Pharisees too. Now, those were the really religious people. Very select group of people. Jesus ate with them too. Jesus heals, brings back to life the daughter of a synagogue official. One who had to be up and maybe had not embraced Jesus, but Jesus brings his daughter back to life. And then a Roman centurion, that's a soldier, and centurion means he probably had 100 soldiers under his command, has a servant who's very ill, and Jesus heals that person too. And Jesus says about the Roman centurion, wow, I haven't seen such faith even in all of Israel. And Jesus was never those people. It was always just everybody, all people. Jesus even takes the time and has a wonderful, in-depth conversation at night with a Pharisee named Nicodemus, ruler, part of the council. For Jesus, it wasn't, oh, no, that person, no. And it's in that context of that conversation that Jesus says, Nicodemus, I just want to tell you something. God loved the whole world. Loved it so much, he's given you a son, so that whoever believes in him will have life, have eternal. For Jesus, there was never those people. And yet, now, in the 60-some% people who are part of the church are saying, those people aren't acting like Jesus people. Because sometimes we do too much of those people. God wants us to step into the story. We didn't get to step into the story at the party, but that's the fun part, isn't it? So let's step back in the party. And all of a sudden there's this great celebration, and then there's this awkward moment, right? I mean, things, you're just stunned, aren't you? Get this slave woman out of my house! And have her son go with her. What do you do? Oh, I know something you do. You're already thinking, aren't you? You're at the party. All right, what can I do? How can I help? Is there any way I can take her in without getting Abraham and Sarah all mad at me? Breaking off that relationship? Is there anything I can do? I mean, you're already thinking. Just how am I going to help? How can I do this? What can I say? Because you're just not satisfied with letting somebody treat those people that way. Because you know God is a God who hears everybody. And you know God is a God who sees and helps you to see people as people. Children of God. Just as God opened Hagar's eyes to see a way for life, God opens your eyes. And so you become a living testimony, and you see an opportunity to be God's people and proclaim that, you know what, God's grace is in all people, and it's something that we as Methodists within the Wesleyan tradition, whether it's United Methodist or whatever Methodist, you know, we believe that God's grace is in all people, that the gift of God is in each and every person. And it helps us not to see anyone as those people, but we see everybody as a value of God. You're at the party. There's that blow up, that awkward moment. What do you think?